In my 40 years on the bench, I've seen defendants who were scared, defendants who were remorseful, and defendants who were confused. But every once in a while, someone walks into my courtroom who genuinely believes they're above the law. This case involved a young man whose family name carried weight, dangerous weight, and a restraining order he treated like a suggestion. When he laughed in my face about violating it, I knew this wasn't just about one woman's safety. It was about whether the court still meant anything. Let me tell you what happened. When this case landed on my desk, it came with a warning from the district attorney's office. The defendant, Miguel Alejandro Salazar, 24 years old, was connected to a family with a reputation that stretched far beyond our city. I won't sugarcoat it. His surname was associated with organized crime across multiple states. But in my courtroom, that doesn't matter. What mattered were the charges. 3 counts of violating a restraining order, 1 count of criminal harassment, and 1 count of witness intimidation. The victim, Sofia Morales, was his ex-girlfriend. She'd fled the relationship after months of escalating control and threats. She'd done everything right, filed police reports, obtained a restraining order, moved to a safe location. And still, he found her, repeatedly. As I read through the file, I saw a pattern I've seen too many times. Phone calls from blocked numbers, texts from fake accounts, showing up at her workplace, following her car. The restraining order was clear. No contact, no proximity within 500 feet, no third-party communication. He violated it systematically, deliberately, and, according to the evidence, gleefully. What concerned me most wasn't just the violations, it was the escalation. Each incident got bolder. The texts went from "I miss you" to "you can't hide from me." The final incident involved him standing outside her apartment at 2 a.m., ringing the doorbell for 20 minutes while she called 911, terrified. I remember thinking, Frank, this young woman's life is in danger, and this young man thinks his last name is a shield. Let me walk you through what happened based on the evidence I reviewed, the police reports, and the testimony I heard. Sofia had been in this relationship for 2 years. According to her statement, Miguel was charming at first, generous, attentive, protective. But protective became possessive. He started tracking her phone, questioning where she went, who she spoke to, accusing her of betraying him when she spent time with her own family. When she tried to end it, that's when the real fear began. The first restraining order was issued 4 months before this case reached me. The judge who granted it noted that Miguel had sent over 200 messages in a single weekend after Sofia broke up with him. Some were apologetic. Some were threatening. One read, "You belong to me. You'll understand that eventually." That alone chilled me when I read it. The first violation happened within a week. He showed up at her mother's house claiming he just wanted to talk. When Sofia's brother told him to leave, Miguel reportedly smiled and said, "Tell Sofia I'll see her soon." Police documented it. He was arrested, released on bail, and given a stern warning by the arraignment judge. The second violation was worse. Sofia had started working at a coffee shop across town, trying to rebuild her life. One morning she looked up from the register, and there he was, sitting in the corner booth, staring at her, not ordering, not speaking, just watching. She called the police from the back room, shaking. When officers arrived, Miguel was gone, but he'd left something on the table. A photo of Sofia from that very morning, walking into work. On the back, he'd written, "You look beautiful today." I read that in the police report, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't love, this was control, this was terror. The third violation, the one that brought him into my courtroom, was the most brazen. Sofia had moved again, this time staying with a friend in a different neighborhood. She hadn't told anyone her location except her mother and the police victim advocate. But at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, her phone rang, blocked number. She didn't answer. It rang again and again, 12 times in a row. Then her doorbell started ringing. She looked through the peephole, and there he was, Miguel, smiling directly at the camera, waving. She called 911 immediately. The operator stayed on the line with her while she hid in the bathroom, listening to him ring the bell, knock on the door, call her name. "Sophia, I know you're in there. Come on, don't be dramatic. Just talk to me." When police arrived 7 minutes later, he was still there, sitting on the front steps, casual, like he was waiting for a friend. The officer asked him what he was doing. Miguel shrugged and said, "Visiting my girlfriend." The officer said, "Sir, you have a restraining order. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of her." And this is the part that made my blood run cold when I read the arrest report. Miguel laughed. He actually laughed and said, "Do you know who my family is? That piece of paper doesn't mean anything." He was arrested on the spot, and this time the DA's office pushed for him to be held without bail until trial. The magistrate agreed, citing the escalating danger and his clear disregard for court orders. By the time his case reached my courtroom, there were 3 documented violations, dozens of text messages, photos proving he'd been following her, and a recorded statement where he openly mocked the restraining order. I sat with that file for a long time before his hearing, and I knew this wasn't just about enforcing a court order, it was about protecting a young woman's life. As I continued reviewing the evidence, I saw something that prosecutors and victim advocates see too often, a clear pattern of predatory behavior wrapped in the language of love. The text messages were entered into evidence, hundreds of them. I read through pages of transcripts. They started with apologies. "I'm sorry, I miss you, please just talk to me." Then they shifted to manipulation. "I can't live without you. You're killing me by ignoring me." Then came the threats, thinly veiled. "I'll always find you. You know that, right?" The photos were worse. Miguel had taken pictures of Sophia from a distance, walking to her car, entering her workplace, sitting in a park. These weren't accidental. They were proof of surveillance. He wanted her to know he was watching. That's what stalking is, the destruction of a person's sense of safety. The victim advocate submitted a statement on Sophia's behalf. She described a young woman who couldn't sleep, who checked over her shoulder constantly, who'd lost weight from stress. Sophia had panic attacks. She'd quit her job because he kept showing up. She was living in hiding because a court order, something that should protect her, was being treated like a joke by the one person it was meant to restrain. Then there was the testimony from Sophia's mother, who appeared in court. She told me with tears in her eyes that her daughter used to be full of life. Now she's afraid to leave the house. She thinks he's going to kill her. And honestly, Your Honor, so do I. I've been on this bench long enough to recognize when fear is real. And this was real. The defense attorney argued that Miguel was young, that he was heartbroken, that he didn't understand the severity of his actions. He painted a picture of a lovesick young man who just wanted closure. But I looked at the evidence, I looked at the pattern, and I saw something much darker: entitlement, obsession, and escalation. The final piece of evidence that sealed it for me was a recording. Sophia's friend had filmed Miguel outside the apartment that night before police arrived. In the video, he's calm, smiling, talking to himself, saying, "She's going to come out eventually, she always does." That casual certainty, that confidence that he would get what he wanted, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a man who made a mistake. This was a man who believed rules didn't apply to him. And the most dangerous part? He was probably right to think that, based on his life experience. People like him often get away with it, but not in my courtroom. By the time Miguel's sentencing hearing arrived, word had spread. Victim advocacy groups were watching. Local news outlets requested access. My clerk mentioned that there was chatter online about the case. People asking whether a wealthy, connected defendant would face real consequences or just another slap on the wrist. I'll be honest with you, that kind of attention doesn't influence my decisions, but it does remind me why this work matters. Because people are watching to see if the justice system works the same for everyone, or if money and power create different rules. Some people online were calling for the maximum sentence. Others were defending Miguel, saying he was being persecuted because of his family name. There were debates, arguments, hot takes. But here's what I tell people, and what I told my staff that morning. The noise outside doesn't change what happens inside this courtroom. I don't sentence based on public opinion. I sentence based on the law, the facts, and the safety of the victim. Still, I understood the stakes. This case was a test, not of me, but of the system. If a restraining order means nothing, if someone can violate it repeatedly and laugh about it, then we're telling every abuse victim in this city that we can't protect them. That's not a message I was willing to send. When Miguel Alejandro Salazar walked into my courtroom, the first thing I noticed was his posture. Confident, relaxed. He was dressed in an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, and he moved like someone who'd never been told no in his life. Sophia sat in the front row with her victim advocate. I could see her hands shaking. She wouldn't look at him. But he looked at her several times, and each time he did, she seemed to shrink. I called the court to order and said, "Mr. Salazar, please step forward." He did, slowly, almost leisurely. His attorney stood beside him, a well-known defense lawyer from a big firm downtown. I said, "Mr. Salazar, you're here today for sentencing on 3 counts of violating a restraining order, criminal harassment, and witness intimidation. Do you understand the charges?" He nodded. I said, "I need a verbal response for the record." He smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Yes, Your Honor." That smile bothered me. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't apologetic. It was dismissive. I continued. "Before I issue my ruling, I want to make sure I understand the facts. You were issued a restraining order 4 months ago, correct?" "Yes." "And that order clearly stated you were to have no contact with Miss Morales. No phone calls, no texts, no physical proximity within 500 feet. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And yet, within that 4-month period, you contacted her repeatedly, showed up at her workplace, followed her, and appeared at her residence in the middle of the night. Is that correct?" He glanced at his attorney, who whispered something. Then he said, "I was trying to talk to her." I leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Salazar, the restraining order doesn't have an exception for trying to talk. It says no contact. Do you understand what no contact means?" He shrugged. "I understand. I just didn't think it applied when I wasn't trying to hurt her." I felt my patience thinning. "Mr. Salazar, a restraining order doesn't require you to physically harm someone before it applies. It exists to prevent harm. The fact that you don't understand that, or don't care, is precisely why we're here." His attorney spoke up. "Your Honor, my client is a young man who made errors in judgment due to emotional distress. He's willing to comply moving forward." I held up my hand. "Counselor, I've read the file. Your client had multiple opportunities to comply. He chose not to. Let's be clear about that." Then I turned to Sophia. "Miss Morales, would you like to address the court?" She stood slowly, with the help of her advocate. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Your Honor, I haven't slept in months. I can't work. I can't see my friends. I'm afraid every time I hear a car outside or my phone rings. I did everything I was supposed to do. I got the restraining order. I reported every violation. I moved 3 times, and he still found me, every time. I don't feel safe. I don't think I ever will as long as he's free." Her voice cracked at the end, and she sat down quickly, wiping her eyes. I looked at Miguel. His expression hadn't changed. No remorse, no shame, nothing. I said, "Mr. Salazar, did you hear what Miss Morales just said?" "Yes." "Do you have anything to say to her?" He paused, then said, "I never meant to scare her." I waited. That was it. That was his statement. I took a breath and said, "Mr. Salazar, let me tell you what I've learned in 40 years on this bench. When someone says, 'I never meant to scare her,' what they really mean is, 'I didn't care if I scared her,' because your actions, showing up at her home at 2 a.m., following her, sending her photos proving you're watching, those actions have one purpose, to terrify. And you knew it." He didn't respond. I continued. "When you were arrested outside her apartment, the officer asked you what you were doing. Do you remember what you said?" He hesitated. "Not exactly." I picked up the police report. "You said, 'Do you know who my family is?'" That piece of paper doesn't mean anything. I put the report down and looked directly at him. That piece of paper is a court order. It represents the authority of this court to protect people, and you laughed at it. For the first time, his smile faded. I said, "Let me be very clear with you, Mr. Salazar. I don't care who your family is. I don't care what your last name is. I don't care how much money you have or how many lawyers you can afford. In this courtroom, you are subject to the same laws as everyone else. And when you violate those laws, repeatedly, deliberately, and arrogantly, you face consequences." His attorney interjected, "Your Honor, my client is willing to accept counseling, probation." I said, "Counselor, probation was an option after the first violation, maybe even after the second. But your client has shown through his actions and his words that he does not respect the authority of this court or the safety of Miss Morales. Probation is not sufficient." I could see Miguel's jaw tighten. The confidence was slipping. I said, "Mr. Salazar, I want you to understand something. A restraining order is often the last line of defense for someone in fear. When people like you treat it like a joke, you send a message to every victim of domestic violence, every person living in terror, that the court can't protect them. That's unacceptable." Then I delivered my ruling. I've been on this bench long enough to know that sentencing isn't just about punishment. It's about protection, deterrence, and, when possible, rehabilitation. But it's also about sending a message. I looked at Miguel and said, "Mr. Salazar, here's what I'm ordering. First, you are sentenced to the maximum allowable term under state law for 3 counts of violating a restraining order, 1 year on each count to run consecutively. That's 3 years incarceration." I could see his face change. The smugness evaporated. "Second, upon your release, you will be placed on supervised probation for 5 years. During that time, you will have no contact, direct or indirect, with Miss Morales. That means no phone calls, no letters, no messages through third parties, no social media contact, nothing. Third, you will be required to wear a GPS monitor for the duration of your probation. If you come within 1,000 feet of Miss Morales, not 500, but 1,000, you will be arrested immediately and returned to custody. Fourth, you will complete a certified batterer intervention program, not anger management, a program specifically designed for people who engage in controlling abusive behavior. Fifth, you will perform 500 hours of community service at a domestic violence shelter where you will see firsthand the damage that people like you cause." I paused and looked at him directly. "Mr. Salazar, this sentence isn't about revenge. It's about teaching you something you should have learned long ago. Other people are not your property. When someone says no, it means no. When a court says stay away, it means stay away. Your feelings, your desires, your ego, they do not override another person's right to safety." His attorney started to speak, but I continued. "You stood outside her apartment at 2 a.m. and rang her doorbell while she hid in terror. You told the police that the restraining order didn't mean anything because of who your family is. You laughed at the authority of this court. Well, let me tell you something. In my courtroom, your name means nothing. Your money means nothing. What means something is the law and the safety of the people this court is sworn to protect." I could see Sophia crying quietly in the gallery, but these were different tears. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. I said, "Miss Morales, I want you to know, this court takes your safety seriously. The order I've issued today is designed to keep you safe. If he violates it, if he comes near you, contacts you, or tries to intimidate you in any way, he will face additional criminal charges and significant prison time." Then I turned back to Miguel. "Mr. Salazar, I hope you use this time to reflect, to understand the harm you've caused, to become someone who respects other people's boundaries and autonomy. Because if you don't, the next judge you stand in front of won't be as measured as I am." I struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. After I delivered the sentence, the courtroom was silent for a moment. Then Sophia's mother reached over and hugged her daughter, both of them crying. Miguel was led away by the bailiffs. For the first time, I saw something in his face that might have been reality setting in. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was anger, but the arrogance was gone. Sophia approached the bench with her advocate. She thanked me, her voice still shaking. I told her what I tell every victim who comes through my courtroom. You did everything right, you were brave, and I hope you can start to feel safe again. She nodded, wiped her tears, and left with her mother. Later that afternoon, my clerk told me the ruling was getting attention online. Advocacy groups were calling it a victory. Some people were angry, saying I was too harsh. Others said I wasn't harsh enough. But here's what I told my staff and what I believe. I didn't sentence Miguel Salazar for the internet. I sentenced him because a young woman's life was in danger, and he treated her fear like a game. Restraining orders only work if we enforce them. If we let people violate them without consequences, then we're telling victims, you're on your own. That's not justice. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Sophia. She told me she'd moved to another state, started therapy, and was beginning to rebuild her life. She said she finally felt like she could breathe. That letter is why I do this job. Let me tell you what I hope people learn from this case. First, a restraining order is not a suggestion. It's a court order backed by the full force of the law. When someone violates it, they're not just disrespecting one person. They're disrespecting the entire legal system designed to protect vulnerable people. Second, no amount of money, no family name, no amount of power puts you above the law. In my courtroom, everyone is equal. That's not just a saying, that's a principle I've upheld for 40 years. And third, and this is important, if you're in a situation like Sophia's, please reach out, get help, file for protection, report violations. The system isn't perfect, but it can work. And there are judges, advocates, and officers who will fight for your safety. Miguel Salazar thought he was untouchable. He learned he wasn't. That's what justice means to me. After 40 years on this bench, that's what I still believe.